The supermarket was bustling that afternoon, with shoppers moving in and out, carts rattling against the tiled floor. Among the crowd was Lisa Jackson, a well-dressed black woman in her early 40s, her calm demeanor standing out amidst the usual chaos. She had just finished a long day at work and stopped by the store to pick up a few essentials. Her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the stack of cases waiting for her the next day. As a district judge, Lisa's days were often filled with difficult decisions and high-stress situations, but she carried herself with grace and poise. In another aisle, Karen Wallace, a middle-aged woman with short, platinum blonde hair and a perpetually pinched expression, was muttering under her breath. She had been waiting in line for what she felt was an eternity. Patience wasn't her strong suit, and she was already annoyed by the slow-moving line at the self-checkout. When Lisa joined the queue with her basket, Karen's irritation flared. She convinced herself that Lisa had cut in line, though Lisa had simply joined an open lane as instructed by a store employee. Karen's voice, sharp and laced with indignation, cut through the air. "Excuse me, you can't just push ahead of people who've been waiting." Lisa turned, her brows knitting together in confusion. "I wasn't cutting. The associate told me to step here," she explained politely, her tone firm but calm. But Karen wasn't having it. Her voice grew louder, drawing the attention of other shoppers. "Oh sure, just because you think you're special doesn't mean you get to skip the rules." Lisa took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to argue. I followed the directions of the staff." Karen's face flushed, her anger boiling over. Without warning, she reached into her handbag, pulled out a small canister of pepper spray, and aimed it directly at Lisa. The canister hissed as Karen sprayed a cloud of the stinging substance toward Lisa's face. Lisa stumbled back, her eyes burning as she cried out in pain. Several bystanders gasped, rushing to Lisa's side as Karen stood there, seemingly proud of herself. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about cutting in line." Karen spat, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. The scene quickly spiraled into chaos. Store employees called for security, and someone dialed 911. Karen, still clutching the pepper spray, looked smug and unapologetic as she watched Lisa struggle to regain her composure. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly imagined, was who Lisa really was. This wasn't just another shopper she had attacked in a fit of misplaced rage. Lisa Jackson, the woman she had just humiliated in public, was the same judge presiding over Karen's ongoing court case for a series of misdemeanors. Minutes later, as the reality of the situation began to unfold, Karen's expression changed from smug satisfaction to sheer disbelief. The moment of recognition left her stunned, her arrogance melting into a trembling mix of fear and regret. Lisa, still recovering but regaining her calm, looked Karen directly in the eyes. The authoritative presence she carried in the courtroom was unmistakable. "You have no idea what you've just done," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the pain. The sirens grew louder, signaling that the police were moments away. Karen's world was about to come crashing down, and she had no one to blame but herself. The wail of the sirens grew louder, and Karen's smug expression began to falter. The realization that this wasn't going to go her way started to creep in. Lisa, still blinking away the burning sensation in her eyes, remained calm despite the chaos around her. She was a professional, used to maintaining composure in high-pressure situations, but this wasn't a courtroom. This was personal. By now, a small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves and recording the incident on their phones. The air was thick with tension, and Karen, realizing she was the center of attention, crossed her arms defensively. "I was just defending myself," she said loudly, looking around as if to gain support. "You also had tried to cut in line, right?" The onlookers exchanged uneasy glances. A young woman with a phone in hand spoke up. "No one saw her cut in line. You attacked her for no reason," she said firmly. Karen's face turned red as she stammered. She was being aggressive. "I felt threatened." Lisa, still holding a tissue to her face, straightened up with the help of a kind shopper who offered her water. Her voice was steady but low, carrying the weight of someone who had dealt with this kind of nonsense far too often. "Threatened. You attacked me unprovoked. Let's see what the police have to say about that." Karen's eyes darted toward the entrance as two uniformed officers strode in, their faces serious as they assessed the scene. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man, approached Lisa first. "Ma'am, are you okay? Were you sprayed with pepper spray?" Lisa nodded, her voice calm despite her discomfort. "Yes, I was. This woman," she said, gesturing toward Karen, "attacked me while I was standing in line. I did nothing to provoke her. The officer turned to Karen, who immediately went on the defensive. I was protecting myself, she blurted out. She was acting hostile, and I didn't feel safe. I had to do something. The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing at the scattered crowd. Did anyone here witness what happened? He asked, his voice firm but neutral. Several hands shot up, and voices began overlapping. She sprayed her for no reason. One man said, "The lady wasn't doing anything wrong." Another chimed in. The young woman with the phone stepped forward. "I have the whole thing on video if you need it." Karen's face drained of color. She looked at the officer pleadingly. "This is ridiculous. I was just defending myself," she repeated, her voice cracking. The officer held up a hand, signaling her to stop. "Ma'am, we'll review the evidence, but for now, you'll need to come with us." He gestured for his partner to secure the pepper spray canister Karen was still clutching. "What? Are you arresting me?" Karen's voice rose, a mix of disbelief and indignation. "This is outrageous. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer remained calm, his tone professional but firm. "Ma'am, we're detaining you for questioning. Please cooperate." As Karen was escorted out of the store, her protests echoing behind her, the crowd began to disperse. Lisa, now seated on a bench near the entrance, was handed an ice pack by a concerned store employee. The other officer knelt beside her. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention?" Lisa shook her head. "I'll be fine, just need a moment." "Can you tell me your name?" the officer asked, pulling out a notepad. "Lisa Jackson," she replied evenly. The officer paused, glancing up at her. "Judge Jackson." Lisa nodded, her expression unreadable. "That's correct." The officer's demeanor shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "I'll make sure this incident is handled properly, Judge. I'm sorry you had to experience this." Lisa gave a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you. I trust the process will take its course." Meanwhile, outside the store, Karen was seated in the back of the patrol car, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Lisa's name sounded familiar. But it wasn't until one of the officers mentioned Judge Jackson over the radio that her stomach dropped. She replayed the name in her head, the pieces slowly clicking into place. "No, it can't be," she muttered to herself, her voice trembling. She thought back to the courtroom a few weeks ago, the stern but fair judge presiding over her case. The same poised demeanor, the same calm authority. Her heart sank. It was her. Inside the store, Lisa was finishing her statement to the officer when her phone buzzed. It was a message from a colleague. "Are you okay? Just saw a video of you at the store. It's going viral." Lisa sighed, glancing at the young woman who had filmed the incident. She wasn't surprised the footage had made its way online so quickly. This was the digital age after all. Nothing stayed private for long. She looked at the officer and said quietly, "I'll be heading home now. If you need anything else, you know where to reach me." As Lisa walked out to her car, she noticed Karen still sitting in the back of the patrol car, her face pale and eyes wide. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Karen seemed to fully grasp the magnitude of what she had done. Lisa held her gaze for a second before turning away, her expression unreadable. Driving home, Lisa allowed herself to exhale, the weight of the day settling in. She wasn't just a judge today, she was a target of someone's prejudice and misplaced anger. It wasn't the first time, and she doubted it would be the last. But as she pulled into her driveway, she resolved to handle this situation with the same integrity she brought to her courtroom. Karen, on the other hand, was spiraling. She sat in the holding cell at the station, replaying the event over and over. How could she have been so reckless, so blind? And now, knowing who Lisa was, she realized the consequences might be far more severe than she'd anticipated. Back at home, Lisa sipped her tea, scrolling through her phone. The video had already racked up thousands of views and comments. Most were supportive, condemning Karen's actions and praising Lisa's composure. But a few were less kind, questioning why Lisa hadn't done more to defend herself or insinuating that she must have done something to provoke the attack. Lisa sighed. No matter how far society had come, there were always voices trying to justify the unjustifiable. She put her phone down and leaned back in her chair, her mind drifting. Tomorrow, she would have to face Karen again, not in a supermarket, but in her courtroom. And this time, the power dynamic would be unmistakable. Lisa wasn't one to let personal feelings cloud her judgment, but she couldn't deny the irony of the situation. Karen had no idea what she'd just set in motion, and Lisa had a feeling she wouldn't forget this lesson anytime soon. The next morning, Lisa stepped into her courtroom, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood floors. The familiar surroundings were a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous day. This was her domain, a place where order prevailed and justice was served. She adjusted her robe, took a deep breath, and prepared herself. Despite the events of the supermarket, she was determined to maintain her professionalism. Personal feelings couldn't dictate her actions here. Karen, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. Sitting in the courthouse waiting area, she fidgeted anxiously, her mind racing. She had spent the night in a holding cell, replaying the incident over and over. Her lawyer, a weary-looking man in his 50s, sat beside her, flipping through paperwork. "You need to stay calm," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "The judge will hear your case fairly, no matter what happened yesterday." Karen barely nodded. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of Lisa's piercing gaze in the parking lot haunted her. Would she be fair, or would this turn into a personal vendetta? Karen wasn't sure, but she knew one thing: she couldn't afford to let this ruin her life. When an end was finally called, Karen's legs felt like jelly as she stood. Walking into the courtroom, she avoided looking at the bench, her eyes fixed on the floor. But when she finally glanced up and saw Lisa sitting there, calm and composed, the weight of her actions hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just any judge. This was Lisa Jackson, the woman she had humiliated and attacked in front of dozens of witnesses. Lisa's expression gave nothing away. Her voice was measured as she addressed the courtroom. "The matter before us today involves Karen Wallace. Ms. Wallace, you're being charged with assault and use of a weapon in a public place. How do you plead?" Karen's lawyer rose to his feet. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty." Lisa nodded, making a note. "Very well. We'll proceed." As the prosecutor laid out the evidence, including the video footage from the supermarket, Karen felt herself shrinking further into her seat. The video left no room for interpretation. It showed her pulling out the pepper spray, her face twisted with anger as she aimed it directly at Lisa. Watching it play out on the screen, Karen barely recognized herself. How had it come to this? But the prosecution didn't stop there. They called witnesses, store employees and shoppers who had been present during the incident. One by one, they described what they saw, painting a damning picture of Karen's actions. "She just started yelling at the lady for no reason," a young cashier said, her voice steady but firm. "The woman didn't do anything wrong. She was just standing in line." The defense tried to argue that Karen had felt threatened, but the evidence made that claim hard to support. The video footage showed Lisa standing calmly, her posture non-confrontational, while Karen escalated the situation. Throughout it all, Lisa remained impartial. She listened attentively, asking clarifying questions when necessary, but her demeanor never wavered. If she felt any personal anger or bias, she didn't let it show. This was about justice, not revenge. Karen's lawyer did his best to defend her, bringing up her character and lack of prior violent incidents. He argued that she had acted impulsively, not maliciously, and urged the court to consider her actions in context. But even he seemed to know it was an uphill battle. As the hearing continued, Karen couldn't help but notice the quiet strength Lisa exuded. It wasn't just her role as a judge, it was who she was as a person. Despite everything Karen had done, Lisa hadn't lashed out. She hadn't used her position to humiliate her. Instead, she had let the legal process play out, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Meanwhile, the case was gaining attention outside the courtroom. The video from the supermarket had gone viral overnight, sparking heated debates online. Some commenters praised Lisa's composure, calling her a role model for handling such a tense situation with dignity. Others condemned Karen's actions, labeling her entitled and reckless. But a small vocal minority tried to twist the narrative, accusing Lisa of playing the victim or suggesting she had provoked Karen in some way. Lisa didn't pay much attention to the chatter. She had a job to do, and she wasn't going to let public opinion sway her. But she couldn't ignore the broader implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about her and Karen. It was about something bigger, a reminder of the biases and prejudices that still existed in society, bubbling just beneath the surface. Karen, too, was beginning to see things differently. Sitting in the courtroom, listening to the evidence against her, she felt a growing sense of shame. She had convinced herself she was in the right, but now, faced with the truth, she couldn't deny the ugliness of her actions. She had let her anger and assumptions get the better of her, and now she was paying the price. By the time the hearing concluded, the tension in the room was palpable. Lisa announced that she would review the evidence and deliver her decision in the coming days. As Karen left the courtroom, she couldn't bring herself to meet Lisa's gaze. She felt exposed, her carefully constructed image of herself as a good, decent person shattered. But the story wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, reporters and cameras waited, eager for a statement from either party. Lisa slipped out a side door, avoiding the media frenzy. She had no interest in turning this into a spectacle. For her, it was about justice, plain and simple. Karen, however, wasn't so lucky. The moment she stepped outside, she was bombarded with questions. "Do you regret your actions?" One reporter shouted. "What do you have to say to Judge Jackson?" Another asked. Karen froze, overwhelmed by the flashing cameras and shouting voices. Her lawyer quickly ushered her into a waiting car, but the damage was done. As Karen sat in the back seat, staring out the window, she couldn't escape the weight of what she had done. The shame, the regret, the fear of what might come next. It was all-consuming. But beneath it all was a small spark of something else. A realization, perhaps, that this wasn't just about her. It was about the assumptions she had made, the biases she hadn't even realized she carried. And for Lisa, as she drove home that evening, there was a sense of resolve. This case wasn't just another day in court. It was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, to hold people accountable, to seek justice, and to make a difference in a world that still had a long way to go. The tension hung in the air, unresolved, as both women faced the uncertain path ahead. Their lives had collided in a moment of chaos, but the ripple effects were just beginning to unfold. The days following the hearing were tense, and the weight of the situation pressed down on both Lisa and Karen. Lisa went about her duties, but her mind was often elsewhere, replaying the confrontation at the supermarket and the subtle shift in the atmosphere in her courtroom. She knew Karen's actions were driven by something deeper, something that reached beyond a moment of frustration and a line. It was the unspoken biases that many carried, the assumptions that people like Karen made about someone like Lisa. The idea that Lisa, as a black woman, wasn't deserving of the same basic respect in a public setting. That was what had set everything in motion. And Lisa had a feeling that Karen hadn't fully realized what she'd done, how deep the implications of her actions went. Karen, on the other hand, found herself consumed by guilt, but also by fear. The viral video had not only tarnished her reputation, but it had also sparked a firestorm of public backlash. Every time she opened her phone, there were comments, news stories, and discussions about her. She couldn't escape it. But the worst part was the looming uncertainty of the court's decision. Lisa, the judge, the same woman she had wronged so terribly, would soon decide her fate. The days dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Karen tried to go about her life, but it was impossible to pretend like everything was normal. Everywhere she went, people stared. Some whispered behind her back, while others made their disapproval known, even calling her out directly in public. She tried to tell herself she didn't care, but the truth was, every time someone looked at her sideways, the shame crept back in. The weight of knowing what she had done to Lisa, the power dynamic she had abused, gnawed at her. She had never once considered the consequences of her actions before. Now all she could think about was the moment when Lisa would make her decision. Lisa knew the day was fast approaching when she would have to face Karen again, but this time it would be in the quiet confines of her office. She had spent hours reviewing the case, the video, the witness statements, and her own feelings. She was determined to be objective, to uphold the law, but it wasn't easy. She had been a judge for years, and in all that time there had never been a case quite like this. The personal nature of the attack, the racial undertones, and the public spectacle all added layers of complexity to the situation. As Lisa sat at her desk, a soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her assistant, holding an envelope. "Judge Jackson, this just came in for you," the assistant said, her tone neutral, but there was a glint of curiosity in her eyes. Lisa took the envelope and opened it, her brow furrowing as she read the contents. It was a letter from Karen's lawyer, asking for a private meeting with Lisa before the final decision was made. The letter didn't give any specifics, but the request was clear. Karen wanted to speak with her, to possibly try and explain herself, to apologize. Lisa's grip on the letter tightened, a mix of surprise and frustration bubbling inside her. Why now? Why didn't Karen take responsibility when it mattered, when it could have made a difference? Why wait until the very last moment when everything was already set in motion? She set the letter down and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Would meeting with Karen change anything? Would hearing her out give Lisa the closure she needed? Or would it just bring more chaos into an already tangled situation? The hours passed, and as the day wore on, Lisa found herself walking down a hallway toward her office, her thoughts scattered. It wasn't long before she reached the door and opened it. There was Karen, sitting across from her desk, looking so much smaller than she had in the courtroom, her posture slumped. She didn't look like the woman who had sprayed pepper spray at her in the supermarket. She looked like someone who had been broken, someone who had come face to face with the consequences of her actions and didn't know how to pick up the pieces. Karen stood as Lisa entered, her expression filled with nervousness and something else, regret, perhaps, or fear. "Judge Jackson," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Lisa didn't immediately respond. She took her seat, a gaze steady but unreadable. "I wasn't sure why you wanted to meet," she said, her tone even. "But here you are. So tell me, Karen, why?" Karen swallowed hard, her hands shaking slightly as she clasped them together. I know I can't undo what happened. I know I've made a huge mistake. I'm not asking for sympathy, but I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. I don't know why I reacted that way. I've never, ever treated anyone like that before. I don't know what came over me." Lisa's eyes narrowed just slightly. She wasn't sure she believed Karen's apology, not completely. It sounded rehearsed, as if it had been said 1,000 times in front of a mirror, trying to convince herself that the words were enough. But Lisa wasn't sure if it was enough for her either. "You attacked me, Karen, for no reason other than the fact that you didn't like something you thought you saw. You didn't stop to think about who I was or how your actions could have consequences. You didn't stop to think about what you were doing in that moment," Lisa said, her voice firm but not unkind. Karen's face twisted with emotion, and she took a deep breath, her voice breaking. I didn't realize, Judge. I didn't even think about it. I was just angry. I felt like I was being disrespected, and I took it too far. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. I'm sorry." For a long moment, the room was silent. Lisa studied Karen's face, searching for some sign that she wasn't just saying what she thought Lisa wanted to hear. But the longer she looked at her, the more she saw the cracks in Karen's facade. It wasn't just guilt. There was fear there too. Fear of the consequences, fear of being judged herself, fear of the unknown. But Lisa wasn't sure if that fear was enough. She wasn't sure if she could let it go so easily. The tension in the room was thick, and Lisa could sense that they were both standing at the edge of something big. Karen had apologized, but would it be enough to prevent the full weight of her actions from coming down on her? Would Lisa make an exception, or would she stick to the law, no matter how personal this had become? Lisa stood, breaking the silence. "I'll take your apology into consideration, but you need to understand that your actions have consequences. This isn't just about you and me. It's about what's right." Karen nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand. I hope it's not too late." As Karen left the office, Lisa sat back down at her desk, the weight of the decision settling over her. What had just happened? Was this a genuine change, or just another attempt to avoid responsibility? The clock was ticking. She knew the time was coming when she would have to make her final ruling. As Karen's footsteps faded away down the hallway, Lisa sat in the stillness of her office, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She had never been one to let personal feelings cloud her judgment, but this situation had been a challenge. The apology, though shaky and tinged with fear, was real. There was no denying that. But would it be enough to change the course of events? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. The name on the screen made her heart skip a beat. It was a call from her assistant, but it wasn't just a routine check-in. "Judge Jackson, I need you to come down to the lobby immediately." Her assistant's voice crackled through the line, urgency in her tone. "There's something here for you. You need to see this." Confusion surged through Lisa. What could possibly be so important that it warranted her immediate attention? She stood up quickly, grabbing her coat and heading toward the elevator. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but she couldn't afford to waste any time. The only thing she was certain of was that something had changed, something big. As she entered the lobby, she saw her assistant standing near the entrance, holding a thick file. The assistant looked visibly shaken, her eyes wide as she approached Lisa. "Judge Jackson, you're not going to believe this," she said, handing over the file. "This just came in, an anonymous tip about Karen." Lisa's heart sank as she opened the folder. Inside was a series of photos and documents, each one more shocking than the last. There were pictures of Karen, taken from a distance but unmistakable, attending a high-profile charity event just days before. What caught Lisa's attention, however, wasn't the event itself but the person standing beside Karen in the photographs. The man was a well-known local politician, known for his controversial stances on race and immigration. Lisa had seen him on the news, speaking out against policies that promoted equality. The connection was jarring, and it sent a chill down her spine. But that wasn't all. The documents included a series of messages, printed out and highlighted between Karen and this politician. The messages were laced with coded language discussing the need to teach certain people their place and set things right for the future. The implications were clear. Karen's actions may not have been a momentary lapse in judgment after all. There was something far more sinister beneath the surface. Lisa stood there, the file trembling in her hands. The realization hit her like a freight train. Karen wasn't just a woman who had snapped in the heat of a moment. She was part of something much larger, something that could have far-reaching consequences. Her mind raced as she processed the information. Could Karen have been influenced, manipulated? Had she been part of a larger plan to create division, to stir up chaos for political gain? Lisa's instincts told her this wasn't a coincidence. The timing, the connections, everything felt orchestrated. But why would Karen go this far? What had she been promised? The situation had escalated beyond anything Lisa could have imagined. It wasn't just about one woman's actions anymore. It was about something much darker, much more dangerous. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just a case of public humiliation or a few days of bad press. This was a calculated attempt to use her as a pawn in a larger game of power and control. Lisa felt her pulse quicken as she looked over the evidence again. She could see the threads of manipulation now, the way Karen had been pulled into this web without even fully understanding what she was a part of. But what was her role? Was she just a tool, or had she willingly participated in this plot? The questions swirled in Lisa's mind, each one more urgent than the last. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Karen was likely just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. But the most unsettling part was the possibility that someone out there was orchestrating this entire thing, watching it unfold from the shadows. Lisa's mind snapped back to the present as her assistant spoke again, her voice trembling. "Judge, there's something else. The sources, whoever they are, left a note with the file. It says, you're not the only one watching." The words hit Lisa like a punch to the gut. She wasn't the only one watching. Who else knew about this? Who else was involved? The implications were terrifying. If Karen was just a pawn, who were the players behind the scenes? As Lisa stood there, wrestling with the enormity of the situation, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her stomach dropped. "Don't trust the evidence you've been given. It's not what it seems. Meet me tonight, and I'll explain everything. Come alone." The message was chilling. Who was this person? Was it someone trying to help, or was it part of the larger game? Lisa's mind raced, but she knew one thing for certain. The stakes had just been raised to a level she wasn't prepared for. Her gut told her that this was the moment she had been dreading. She had to make a choice. Would she follow the trail of breadcrumbs, risking everything to uncover the truth? Or would she ignore the warning and stick to the safety of what she knew, keeping her eyes on the law and the case in front of her? The clock was ticking, and Lisa knew she didn't have much time to decide. The consequences of either choice could be devastating. What started as a simple case of racial tension in a supermarket line had grown into a tangled web of power, manipulation, and potential danger. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. Lisa took a deep breath, her mind made up. She had to meet this mysterious person. She had to know the full extent of what she was dealing with, even if it meant stepping into unknown territory. If Karen was just a pawn, then who was playing the game? And what was their ultimate goal? As the tension mounted, Lisa braced herself for what was to come. She couldn't ignore the feeling that this meeting, this moment, was about to change everything.